From Bias to Equality podcast is brought to you by the CEO magazine, Holman Webb Lawyers, and B2Buy.
Hello, and welcome to my podcast, From Bias to Equality. I'm your host, Sandra D'Sousa. Thank you for joining us. Today, we are going to have a conversation with Dr. Aoife Brennan. She served as Synlogic's president and chief executive officer since May 2018. She joined Symlogic in September 2016 as chief medical officer. Prior to Synlogic, Aoife spent 6 years at Biogen, most recently as vice president and head of the Rare Disease Innovation Unit, developing programs from preclinical to commercial. Aoife serves as a member of the board of directors of Ceravance and Fibrogen, and previously served on the board of directors of Ra Pharmaceuticals until its acquisitions by UCB. Now, about Synlogic. Synlogic is a Nasdaq-listed company, which was founded in 2014 by MIT professors Jim Collins and Tim Lu. They combine synthetic biology, a form of precision biological engineering, with principles of traditional drug development to design medicines for diseases that are in need of new approaches. The result is a robust engine that can create these potential medicines called synthetic biotics to improve patients' lives. Synthetic biotics are living probiotics that have genetically engineered to perform specific functions in the GI tract targeting validated biology. They have the potential to treat a range of conditions, including rare diseases, metabolic conditions, immunologic and inflammatory diseases. Because synthetic biotics are orally administered and are based on familiar probiotics as their delivery method, they offer a potentially convenient and safe approach to treatment. Synlogic also has research collaborations and partnerships with Roche and Ginkgo Bioworks. Hi, Aoife. Thank you so much for joining us today on our podcast.
Oh, it's so nice for you to have me. Thank you, Sandra.
I have to say, just for the listeners here, that you actually have a far more impressive background, and I had to really cut back on so much of the details. And you're certainly, with your education and your experience, you're a very impressive CEO.
Oh, thank you so much for that. Sometimes I feel like I've jumped around so much career-wise that there's, I've had a lot of fun. I've learned a tremendous amount. But certainly becoming a CEO of biotech company was not on my career path when I graduated med school. So It's always nice to hear that reflection.
Well, actually, that leads me to my first question. So I guess from when your career journey, like you said, from med school to where you are now, being the CEO of a biotech company that's listed, do you want to share some of that, not information, but I guess details about your journey?
Yes, absolutely. I have a teenager just about to start college, and I talk to him and his friends, and I tell them, you've to go forward, explore, be curious, be open, don't be fixed in terms of where you think the destination is for you. And that's certainly been kind of a guiding light for my career. Of course, when you're in your early 20s, you think you've got it all worked out and you've the whole plan and it's all mapped out and where you're going to live.
You think you know everything as well.
Yeah, too. Yeah. Anyone who tells you otherwise doesn't know what they're talking about. But so I did. I graduated med school in Ireland, thought I knew exactly what I wanted to do was to be a professor back in Ireland. And I did my training in Ireland and then married my husband, who really wanted to come to the States. So I was what they call here a trailing spouse. I essentially followed him across the Atlantic to work in Boston, which at the time was for 1 year only. And we were planning that we would go back. My oldest son was 6 weeks old at the time, so tiny new baby. And then, here we are 20 years later, still living in the States. But, I think at that time, it was kind of one of the first junction in my life, a T-junction. I decided if I was here, even though I had a new, very small baby, I was going to try and make the most of it from a career perspective, and ended up getting a job doing research at one of the academic teaching hospitals here in Boston. And through that, because Boston is such a center of opportunity and there's just so many things going on, once you get your foot in the door, it just opens up all these opportunities for learning and courses and programs. And one of the programs was a teaching program at the Harvard Medical School, which, I was really surprised. I still pinch myself that they actually took me in. I was not a US citizen, had graduated from a foreign medical school, but kind of went for it. And that set me off on kind of a career trajectory that I think has been very positive. It opened up all kinds of other additional opportunities, one of which was to join a biotech company, which of course I had never even considered as a career opportunity for myself. But once I started in my first job in biotech, I knew that this was kind of exactly where I was meant to be. I just loved the pace, the challenge, just the team aspect was really interesting. And I liked that it was science, but it was pragmatic. So you were solving problems, which just really fits my personality type. So that was amazing. My first biotech company was a company called Tolerex. And it was a private company at the time. They were constantly thinking about doing an IPO, becoming a public company. I was relatively junior at that point, but the company had a phase 3 trial that failed, which was a devastating outcome for a small private biotech. So the company ended up closing down. And of course, at the time I thought, oh, I'll never have an opportunity as good as this again. I'll never be happy. This was the right, for some reason, I thought I was going to retire from this company at 65 and was absolutely gutted that I now needed to find a new job, which I think was the next lesson for me. It's just being in the innovation economy means that, you're constantly on the cutting edge, working in companies where you don't know if it's going to work out or not. And you have to be prepared to, move on if things don't work out. And that's kind of how this ecosystem at Boston Biotech works. So after that, went to Biogen and spent 6 years at Biogen in amazing roles. The company was going through a really rapid period of growth at the time where the size of the company was almost doubling every couple of years, and there were far more opportunities than there were good people. And so I always found myself, every 6 months, just as I was about to get my head above water and kind of get my job, I joke about you have to tame every job, which is just getting yourself organized, getting to know what's going on, and that's a painful 6 month period. And you have to, tell your family, hey, I'm in this new job. It's going to be intense. Once I get it under control, then, things will get a little easier. And it seemed like for a number of years, every time I just get to the point where I felt like I was taming my job, I get another opportunity or another responsibility. So that was an amazing experience. And I think really prepared me for being a CEO of a small biotech company, because it was kind of a frenetic pace. And then Biogen went through a strategic decision where they were going to divest part of the company, which happened to be the part of the company I was working on. And I had an opportunity to stay or an opportunity to go with the new spin out. And I decided, okay, now's the time for me to look elsewhere. I'd been at the company almost 6 years and thought, okay, now's an opportunity. So I joined my current company when it was really small. It had just raised its B round of financing. I joined as chief medical officer. And again, the company changed pretty rapidly. Within a year, had become a public company. We'd advanced our first programs into the clinic, at which point the board asked me if I would be interested in becoming CEO. So that was kind of the next juncture, if you will, in my career. My youngest son was still, maybe 18 months, 2 years. So I still had little ones at home. And of course, that was my first, response when I was approached. It was like, oh, not me and not now. It's maybe something I'll do in 10 or 15 years time, but, this is not the right time for my life. And luckily, I had a board member who took me for breakfast in a greasy spoon. I will never forget the experience. He sat me down and he said, you need to get yourself together. There's no reason why you can't do this. And of course, he was right. Just like every other job, there was a period of learning where you need to tame the job, understand who you can trust, where you can delegate, what things you need to own yourself. So it was no different to every other role. And it's been a really fun journey. I've been in the role now about 4 or 5 years and still learning a tremendous amount, and have had the opportunity to participate in other companies too as a board member, which has been a great experience.
Oh, wow, Aoife, that's an amazing, journey that you've had. And look, before I start asking about Elect Stars, I just wanted to ask a couple more questions. Just out of curiosity, is your industry, like, you've been promoted, were you in a male-dominated kind of industry, or was it fairly balanced in your career path?
Yeah, so I think that's a really difficult question to answer, because biotech is probably, if you look at the workforce overall, it's about 50-50 in terms of just gender diversity. But it's like a pyramid, right? And if you look
Yes.
at public biotech companies, because those are kind of easier to quantify, there's lots of private companies, hard to know like how many are there out there. But if you look at the public biotech companies, less than 10% of female CEOs. We've made a little bit of progress on boardroom diversity in biotech industry in the past couple of years. We've started to move the needle. It's now kind of in the high teens, maybe approaching 20% in terms of gender representation among public biotech companies at the board level. But at the CEO level, it continues to be stubbornly stuck in the less than 10% number. For an industry where it's a 50-50 gender split, if you look at the overall company composition. So it's just a really interesting case study, I think, in terms of, why are we not seeing more representation of women at the CEO level, at the C-suite level? I wish I knew the exact answer, but I don't. But, that's how things stand currently in my industry.
But that's why I guess it's fascinating, like for me to ask a few more questions, that you are the CEO of a biotech company, and that you had a board member who championed you, and you also considered the family, the challenges in managing your family. We have a very young, son that you said. So these are the typical, I guess, challenges and concerns for any woman who have a young family, to think, do I step up? Can I do the job? All that stuff. So how did you overcome that? I know you said that you had that greasy breakfast, but how did you weigh it all up to make it work for you?
Well, I think the first thing I think when you're approached about a job like a CEO is it appears to be a very prestigious job. And, I wasn't seeking prestige. I wasn't seeking to, be on a plinth or, to be the front face of the organization. But when I realized, actually, no, it's a job where you're serving others, you're fixing things, you're being useful, you're helping grow the company. When it's framed in those terms, I think it becomes a lot more mission and a lot less kind of about, self-promotion. And it just sat better with me when I started to see it as there's a big need. I'm uniquely qualified to help this company at this time. I understand kind of where the strengths and weaknesses of the organization are. I've been within the organization. I think coming around to being okay with it, that was the first step. And then the second step, I think, I really wanted to make sure that when you do something, you're going to be successful. And I'd never been CEO before. I'd never, I didn't know how much travel was going to be involved. What are people going to expect of me? I have responsibilities on the home front. There was this element of like, I don't want to do it and then fail. I prefer not to do it at all. And it's really challenging when there's no real rule book that tells you, here's what your week is going to be like as a CEO, or here's exactly what you're going to have to do when you go into the office. It's very variable. Different people can make the job what they will. Some people have very team-based executive leadership. Some people have very individual-based executive leadership style. But nobody really tells you that, right? So there's this kind of fog of mystery around the CEO role. But once I got okay with failing, I said, okay, I'm going to try it. I'm going to give it my best. I'm going to see if I can manage it and, keep things going on the home front and, kind of fulfill my other responsibilities. And I'm okay if I put my hand up in 2 years and say, hey, I've given it my best shot. It's not for me, or, I don't want to do this and kind of quote unquote fail as a CEO. And once I used to joke that, you have to put your fear of failure into your desk drawer and lock it with the key and then throw away the key. You have to kind of go through this process of being okay with that as an outcome. I'm like, okay, if that's the worst that can happen, my kids are still going to be healthy. I'm going to be fine. I still have a lot of qualifications. I'll find something to do that pays the bills. Once you kind of go through that mental process of, it could be okay. I'm going to try it. What's the worst that can happen? It makes it a lot easier to be courageous and to step forward and do it. So those are kind of the two things that really influenced my decision to give it a whirl.
That's fantastic, for you to say that, because there is a limiting belief for a lot of professionals who, especially women, because we aim to be perfect. We aim to be the perfect mum, the perfect worker, the perfect wife, all of that stuff, and then that limits us to progress. And when there's an opportunity, we don't lean into it or stand up for it, worrying about all this. So the way that you just described how you process all that thinking, I think that would help a lot of aspiring leaders to say, you know what, if I can do this if I just kind of like be easy on myself, not to be so hard on yourself.
I know.
With life.
Yeah. Yeah, I also think there's a reality of, when you come in an industry where it's 50% of people coming into the industry are female, yet only 10% are ending up kind of in the C-suite at the CEO level. Those few that make it have had consistently positive outcomes, they've either through luck or because they're just amazingly brilliant or whatever it is, right? They've had this, straight up and to the left career to date. And the thoughts of having a blot on your copybook, when you've had this kind of run of like string of successes or you've built a reputation, can I think sometimes hold you back. But then you look around and you see there's lots of people who've had, setbacks, or they've done a great job, but just, the outcome didn't happen the way we, wanted it to happen. And you realize actually there's a lot of people, there's a path forward here. I think it makes it a lot easier.
And I think also your experiences with the startups, that you talked about, and the changes in the company when it got divested, that you've seen, okay, this is like you said, you were planning to retire in the same company, but then it didn't happen. And as devastating as it was, I think it like you said, showed you, yep, you put all your effort in, you think it'll be forever, but then it just happens. But you saw everybody, you bounced back from it. Others have bounced back from it. So it's not the end of the world.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. Yeah. Once you've been laid off once, you're fearless. It creates a little bit of fearlessness. Like, okay, I did it.
I
it's
survived
fine.
it. It's okay. Yeah.
I survived it.
So
Okay, it's survivable.
And so I guess now, just for the listeners, where I wanted to talk about the Elect Stars, the reason behind the Elect Stars is exactly what you're saying, is that, we see there is a push, we see diversity, equity, inclusion policies that kind of supports gender diversity, up to the middle management. But when it comes to C-suites and boards, we're still seeing there's not that sort of level of representation. And ideally, at 40-60 is the range that you want to see. And so the purpose of the Elect Stars is to celebrate the companies that have achieved that. And we want to make it a very straightforward criteria, so there's no ambiguity out of it. And if any company that achieves 3 out of the 4, we consider them as really committed to gender equality, because you start from the top. If that's represented at the top, it cascades down to the rest of the company, making the company also women friendly, or known to be women friendly, and attractive to investors, because you've heard about research that financial performance on diverse boards and C-suite teams generally perform financially better. So the full criteria that we have is if they get a point, if they have at least 1 women CEO or CFO, and I see that you have both, so unfortunately you don't get 2 points, you still get 1 point. Then a women board chair, have at least 25% of women on board of directors, and at least 25% of women on senior leadership team. And with that, like I said, if any company gets 3 out of 4 stars, they qualify for Elect Stars. And when we went through all, like you said, the publicly available information, this is what we can see. And we actually went through almost 9,000 companies in Nasdaq, rating them. Would you like to have a guess how many, when we did the research, how many of them qualified at least 3 out of 4 with the criteria that I've just said?
I think it's probably less than 20%.
30%, did you say?
Yeah.
5%, less than 5%.
Oh my God. Oh my God, less than 5%?
Yep, 204 companies at that time when we went through, of almost 9,000 companies, got 3 stars or more. So wow. It's terrible. And the same we did with ASX, the Australian Stock Exchange. We're going through the London Stock Exchange as well as the New York Stock Exchange to see where they're at. But certainly, if there are various stats to say, yes, I've come across a lot of the research, 20-30% we're seeing some improvements. But if you combine just having these 4 criteria, how we put it. We're not trying to make it very difficult. I don't think they're really challenging, but we instead of 40 to 60%, we had to make it 25% because it was only 200 companies.
Well, now you need to start an index fund.
Yes, I know. Yeah, I should. That's not a bad idea. So with that, I guess seeing your company, can you talk about a little bit with Synlogic, because I see a very balanced team that you have there. Has it always been like this? Was it something that you had to implement? Just some background and how you managed to get such a good balance board and C-suite team.
You know, it hasn't always been like this. I mean, like a lot of small biotech companies, you start out where investors are your board members. And we move very quickly from a Series B to a public company without necessarily often you're preparing by, turning over your board, putting new management team in place who are ready and for that public step. Because we moved quickly through that step from a Series B to essentially a public company, we didn't really have an opportunity to do that thoughtful board evolution process. And just, it's the nature, if you think, elect stars are infrequent, female investors in biotech, or even, it's like hen's teeth, they are very rare. So I think as a consequence, it's not unusual for private biotech companies to have no females at all, either on the board or the C-suite. So I think, the board making the decision to transition the prior CEO to me was an important step, right? And saying, okay, we're going to support you. The transition was at a very difficult time for the company. It was right after we'd become a public company. And to make that, it kind of ruins your stride. It breaks up the momentum, right? If you want to become a public company with the story and the team, right? So that you can run with a consistent story. And they realized they were putting me in a difficult situation and committed to support me through it, which was great. I mean, I have an amazing relationship with the board members who are still very available and coaching and, will pull me aside. And I think that's a really great experience. It's pretty rare though, I think, to have
Definitely.
that kind of experience. And, they've been very supportive of my initiative to diversify the board. So I brought in 2 additional female board members in the last couple of years. They've been very supportive about that. I'm very lucky in that they really see the value that those people bring, and not just from a gender diversity perspective. One of the more recent board members we brought in actually has a human resources background, which is a background that's predominantly female, right? But that background and that skill set is often not represented on corporate boards. And, we appointed Lisa just before the COVID pandemic, where suddenly all kinds of human resource issues just dominated boardrooms, for, 18 months. And she was really able to add value in helping us navigate that, manage to keep people safe while having them in the lab. And, there were a lot of really thorny HR and culture issues that came up around that time. So I think it's been, amazing because I got the immediate yes from the board, and then we've also had some success, and that becomes, that compounds on itself. And similarly, I think diversity at the board and the CEO and C-suite level compounds in terms of making it easier to diversify lower down. I'll often have, either as an advisor, as a board member, see, really, male leadership teams. And when you say, hey, something's wrong, you're not hiring well, if everyone just happens to be male, they will share, well, we've made 2 offers to females and they don't want to join, they've declined our offer, we don't know why. And I'm like, yeah, because they don't want to be the only female in the room. So it is challenging to break through, but once you do break through, it becomes so much easier, because what we find anyway is women are more likely to take chances in terms of promotion, taking on a new role when they have that modeling at the board and the senior level. And when we go to hire people, we actually end up we had to try purposefully early on to make sure we had a diverse slate, but now it almost happens, without us really having to put much effort in, because it's a magnet, right? Having a diverse leadership team, a diverse board, a commitment to, flexibility and family friendly and promoting females and providing career development opportunities makes the task of maintaining that diversity a little easier because you've kind of established those workplace norms, and I think it becomes a magnet. And I see it myself, I often get approached from companies saying, we're looking for a female board member. Of course, the first thing I do is, into Google, put in the company name, pull up their leadership team, pull up their, board. And I'm kind of like, hey guys, even if you were wearing a different tie, it would be diversity. It's like they're all in navy, white, and a red tie. And like every single person on your board, like you don't even have anyone with a high BMI, not to talk about, a different gender. I mean, it's just kind of crazy. And you see those companies all the time, and it's just totally off-putting because nobody wants to be the token female, right? To, the token person, or to have an opportunity just because of your gender and not based on your achievements or background. So I think that's what we found on this journey, is that you reach a tipping point where it becomes a little easier.
Well, that's good. So I like, with what you said, I've also from my initial set of interviews, and that was a commonality in terms of strategies, was having board support made a big difference, and also the recruitment process to help with attracting, because there are companies I've spoken to, not the ones who qualify for elect staffs, but the ones who do try, and said like exactly what you said. They make offers, but the woman talent just said no thank you, or just they just cannot retain them, and because there's more to it. Nobody wants to be the token person in a very strong kind of dominated male-dominated environment. And I'm not saying there's anything. I'm definitely just want to point out, not saying there's anything wrong with men, not man-hater, but diversity is really what would help in anything that we do, and it actually helps companies. So sorry, I realize I'm just going on a soapbox, but what you've said, just coincidentally, is what a lot of good CEOs and that I've interviewed, and how they've managed to get there. So it's really good to hear with what you're saying and your journey, that I really sincerely hope that others would listen and realize that it can be done, but maybe take a different approach.
Yes. Yeah.
So look, I could really just keep talking, but you've given us so much insights. Before we finish off, I just want to ask you, and this is the standard question that I ask all of our business leaders on the interview, whether it's for the book or podcast. What's your advice to other CEOs who are struggling to achieve diversity in their company, even if they want to or need to?
I think, I'm a drug developer, and we often think about drug development as having stages, right? So, I think you have to see it as a phased-based approach, that you're not going to be able to kind of, with one hire or two hires, fix, something that you're unhappy with in terms of the makeup, because it kind of becomes self-fulfilling and self-defining a little bit, because we live in a world where most good talent have options, right? They have choices in terms of what companies they work at. So they will kind of move to companies that more are in line with their values and their thinking and how they want to work. And that's just, particularly in the US now, unemployment levels are very, very low. There's a war on talent. Even with recent layoffs, it's still very, very difficult thing to do. But I think seeing it in phases and, having a very thoughtful approach. The one piece I think that's really helped us is, often as a business leader, you have an urgent need for somebody to fill a role. When you open up a requisition, you need somebody yesterday. And the temptation is always to kind of jump at the first, the recruiter will send you a list of resumes of people, and you kind of just need it's so bad that you just want to, the first person that you think kind of checks the box and is qualified will come. And what we've done is, our head of human resources is very committed to diversity, inclusion, culture, having an innovative culture. And he's often the person on the panel who kind of holds up the hand and said, hey, hold on a second here. Are we sure that we really have the best talent represented here? Let's think again about how we've written the job spec, how we've gone about this search, because it's not possible with a company in an industry where 50% of the workforce is female, that we have an all-male slate or that we have an all-female slate. That's unusual. Let's make sure we're not overlooking something. And it's always irritating at the time because I'm like, oh, we need someone, there's something we have to do. But I think taking that time just really pays dividends, right? It's never easy, but you'll often find, oh, there's like this amazing person that was overlooked because they didn't check this box. So I think having that, angel on your shoulder who's not necessarily owning the business, but has an important stakeholder in the search can be really, really helpful, we found.
That's really good advice. Certainly it's not something that is often discussed about, but I really like that approach, and having that focus, especially on the recruitment approach.
Yeah.
That's great. Oh, Aoife, I really would love to ask more and more questions and talk all in your evening or talk all night and in my morning. But I do have to say, this is it. And thank you so much for being part of our podcast. I really appreciate your insights and sharing them with our listeners. And like I said, this is all to help more and more business leaders to be able to achieve that gender balance boards and C-suite teams. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Sandra. Bye-bye.
Today's episode is brought to you by our wonderful sponsors. Firstly, we're sponsored by B2Buy. B2Buy is your trusted business buying platform that simplifies and automates your buying process, helping you buy smarter and faster, giving you greater visibility and value. With 100,000 products in one place, B2Buy is passionate about connecting diverse suppliers with corporate buyers, so you can create a more inclusive business environment and buy better with www.b2buy.online. Our second sponsor is Holman Webb Lawyers, an award-winning and dynamic full-service Australian law firm with offices in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Adelaide. Not only do Holman Webb offer comprehensive legal services, but they are also a proud recipient of the LX Star, recognizing their commitment to achieving gender equality in leadership. Discover more about their services, initiatives and industry-leading insights at www.holmanwebb.com.au. Lastly, our sponsor, the CEO magazine, is an iconic, global media brand that inspires and promotes excellence within the business world. It is a source of information, inspiration and motivation for the world's most successful leaders, executives, investors and entrepreneurs. Go to www.thesiomagazine.com.